Local programming, TV that's close to home.
Reshuffling the deck in the state of New Jersey, coming up next on Cablevision's Meet the Leaders. Hello and welcome to Meet the Leaders. I'm Debbie Duhame. It's no exaggeration to say that the census will dramatically change the political map of New Jersey. The boundaries of the 13 congressional districts and the 40 legislative districts will be redrawn. One of the key players in this game is 26th District Assemblyman Jay Webber. Thank you so much, Assemblyman, for being here at Meet the Leaders.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure to have you.
Sure, it's good to see you.
I know that, of course, the census numbers coming in, just coming in recently. Tell us how that will change here in the state of New Jersey, how you redistrict.
Well, there's two separate processes. We have to redraw the lines for the 40 state legislative offices very quickly. That has to be done by April. And then we have to redraw the lines for our congressional districts by next year because, of course, we have the state elections in the odd years, so that'll be this November, and we have the congressional elections on the even years with the presidential election next year. So the process of starting to redraw the legislative districts is already underway, and that's why we couldn't start in earnest until we got those numbers. We now receive those numbers so we can begin to reshuffle the deck, as you said.
Yes. Has anything surprised you with the census numbers from 10 years ago?
No. We've been watching the trends over the last decade. The Census Department does estimates throughout the decade, and so what we had been watching up until last year was kind of confirmed when the new numbers came in, the formal numbers that we're going to need to use for the process came in. What we've seen is that the population in New Jersey has grown slightly. Population in the state's grown between 4 and 5%. And we watched the bulk of the population, or the population kind of shift from the northeastern part of the state, Bergen County and Hudson and Essex, down towards Burlington County and Gloucester County, sort of south and west. We also had some growth out in Warren and Hunterdon. Mm-hmm. So we saw that population shift, and then of course the demographic shifts in ethnicity and race have been fascinating. A real spike in Latino population and an increase in Asian American population, and so all of those things will affect how we draw the map. Okay,
we're going to put up a map right now of the districts to show our audience that as well. And this is the southern part of the state of New Jersey. And again, we are seeing, then you said, more of a population growth than in the south and then also off to the west. And you also mentioned the different nationalities, the Latino, the Asian population. Is that growing from the north to the south and west as well? Is that what you're saying?
Well, we've seen the increases in general population in as the map shows, in Burlington, actually Ocean and Gloucester.
Yes.
Generally, Latino population seems to be up everywhere, but you know there are concentrations in Essex County, Hudson County, Passaic County, and that's where you're going to see the most dramatic.
In the northern part of the state. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, you can see the most dramatic growth there. And the reason that's important is we have federal requirements that we have to abide by when we're drawing the map. The Federal Voting Rights Act requires the map makers to take into consideration racial and ethnic block voting when lines are drawn. And so when we look at those demographics and we look at the federal law, it's going to impact how we draw the lines.
Now, as a lawyer, I mean, you know, it can get a little complicated, I would imagine, because you really have to follow certain rules. How does that play into it then?
We have good legal counsel when we're drawing the maps, and basically what the federal law says is that minority groups, traditionally African Americans or Latinos, have to have an opportunity to get fair representation. They have to be able to participate in the political process, and participation and representation are often in the eye of the beholder. There's some legal tests that you can use and then throw statistics up in terms of voting results, but at the end of the day, the upshot of I think the takeaway for the citizens in New Jersey is that race and ethnicity matter when it comes to drawing maps, and the census numbers that we just got will have an impact when we finally sit down and start drawing the lines. And we have to be mindful of where Latino and African American communities are. We have to look at how they've been voting over the last decade and make sure that whatever map we adopt takes into consideration their ability to participate fully in the political process.
I've been reading a little bit about Newark and Jersey City, how we may see changes there. What's happening in that area?
Well, there's an interesting, another development, aside from the ethnic and demographic developments that we've seen with the census numbers. There have been some significant legal developments over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, the map makers split Newark and Jersey City twice each so that they were in 3 legislative districts. And the state constitution says that they should only be split once into 2 legislative districts.
How did it happen then in the first place?
There was a technical legal argument using the Voting Rights Act that said that in order to meet the requirements of the Voting Rights Act, we had to override our state constitutional provision. And the state Supreme Court here in New Jersey said, you're right. And it was the Democrats who made that argument, and they said, you know, Democrats, you're right, Republicans, you're wrong. The Voting Rights Act means that the implications of the Voting Rights Act are that the state constitution has to be overridden. In the last year, actually, but I guess a year and a half ago in 2009, the U.S. Supreme Court addressed the issue that the state Supreme Court addressed 8 years ago. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, actually, the New Jersey State Supreme Court was wrong. And that the argument that the Democrats made in 2001 when they redrew the map was incorrect. The Federal Voting Rights Act does not require New Jersey to override its state constitutional provisions in the case of the districts that were drawn in 2001. And so I think we now have bipartisan agreement between the Democrats and Republicans who are drawing the map this year that the legal principles that we used 10 years ago are no longer in effect, and that we have to keep Newark and Jersey City to only 2 legislative districts as opposed to breaking them up in 3. That only affects the cities of Jersey City and Newark, but it affects the districts around those cities. So it's a big jigsaw puzzle, and when you change one piece, other pieces are inevitably affected, and we'll be seeing that as we start to draw the map.
Will we see some members losing a spot then, fighting for different territories?
It's too early to tell.
It's too early to tell at this point.
Incumbents will be, or certain challengers want to be. The important thing for the map is, look, we're drawing the map for all New Jerseyans. We're drawing it for a decade, and we have to do it in a way that is fair and constitutional and abides by our obligations under the Voting Rights Act. So it's just way too early to analyze horse race or who might be affected and who might not be. We have the numbers, and now we can start applying those numbers to the legal principles we have.
Who else is on the commission with you? I know it's 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats. Who else will you be working with?
Well, the Republican delegation is a strong one. I'm the chairman. Our vice chair is Irene Kim Asbury from Jersey City, an attorney. We have State Senator Kevin O'Toole from Cedar Grove, Ocean County Chairman George Gilmore, and our National Committeeman Bill Palatucci.
And who do you have on the Democratic side?
The Democratic team is chaired by Assemblyman John Wisniewski. He's also the chairman of the Democratic State Committee. Their vice chair is Nilsa Cruz Perez, who is a former Assemblywoman. They have Assemblyman Joe Cryan from Union County, State Senator Paul Sarlo, and last but certainly not least, the Speaker of the Assembly, Sheila Oliver, is an Assemblywoman from the 34th Legislative District, which has a piece of Passaic County as well as Essex.
Now, what about this 11th member that we may see? Is this something that's a definite, or is that something that you may see an 11th member on this commission?
Well, great question, because there's 10-member commission and 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats. If the 10 members can't get to a map they agree on with a majority vote, we can tell the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court that we're at an impasse. We've deadlocked, we can't agree. Then the Chief Justice is tasked with appointing the 11th member, who obviously will break a tie, and that process works in the following way. Once we get the numbers, now that we have the numbers, we have 30 days from the time we get the number to work as 10 members of the commission to try to find consensus and come up with a map. If we can't do that in 30 days, we can either tell the chief we have an impasse, and the chief could assign the 11th member or appoint the 11th member, or at the conclusion of 30 days, the chief would just automatically appoint the 11th member. And so we think it's too early. The Republicans on the committee think it's too early to declare impasse and throw up our hands and quit.
Want to wait the 30 days?
Well, we want an opportunity to look at the numbers and negotiate with the Democrats and share maps, and there might be some consensus we can come to as to what the map should look like. The Democrats have indicated they want an earlier impasse. They don't think we're going to agree, and it might very well be that we don't. But the Constitution sets out a process for us to negotiate. I think the 10 of us are capable individuals and should be able to get together and have those negotiations. And If they fail, we'll go to an 11th member.
What would the 11th member do? Would he or she have to decide, help you guys decide the lines then? Is that really what they would do?
You know, it's what the 11th member makes of the position.
Okay.
You know, I suppose the 11th member could come in and do like arbitration in baseball, which is you have a position here and you have a position here and I'm going to pick one.
Okay.
The 11th member could try to bring the parties together and act as a moderator or a mediator and say, okay, let's see what we can agree upon, or something in between. My sense is that a good 11th member would come in, be an active part of the commission, talk to both sides, understand all positions, and then synthesize those views, try to get the parties as close as they can together, and then eventually the 11th member would have to cast the deciding vote. You would expect, although we haven't resigned ourselves to this, you would expect that the vote on the commission would be 6-5 in favor of one map or another. But again, we haven't given up on that, and who knows, we could agree on...
I agree, may not even need that 11th member. Now, from what I understand, the 11th member, you guys both put in names of people that you like, and the decision could be made to pick somebody that you both agree on. Is that correct?
Well, the Chief Justice contacted the parties early in the process and said, you know, I might have to engage in this process, and if there are names that you find reasonable, I'd be willing to consider them. And so both parties submitted a short list of names, to people we thought would be individuals with whom we could work and are reasonable. And the chief has those names. Only the chief knows for sure whether there's a match on those lists and whether the chief would actually
decide on somebody that matches, and maybe somebody else that he just wants to go with.
Well, exactly right. The Constitution invests in the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court complete discretion as to whom the Chief Justice wants to appoint. And so it doesn't matter whom either party has recommended, and even if there's a match, at the end of the day, the Chief Justice has the obligation, and he retains full discretion on that. Now,
has this happened in the past, like 10 years ago, where we have 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats on the commission, and somebody has to be chosen to help with the map at the end? Is this a common thing that happens?
Yes, the New Jersey went to a commission system like this about 40 years ago, and we've used an 11th member each time we've engaged in the process. 10 years ago, the commission declared impasse immediately upon receiving the numbers and just got to it. The point there was that they got the numbers so much later. Now we've received our numbers early February, so we have some time before the April deadline of coming up with a map. 10 years ago, I think they got the numbers in early March, and so they just went straight to impasse and said, give us that 11th member, we need to figure this out before candidates need to start filing for the primaries in April.
Now, does this person, this 11th member, does it have to be an independent? Because of course you have Republicans, Democrats. Would it be an independent
There's no requirement for party registration or anything. Of course, last time we had an 11th member, the professor from Princeton, Professor Bartels, he wasn't a registered voter.
Oh, okay. So it could be anybody.
Which was a little disappointing because it was someone who really didn't participate in the process at all.
Oh, I see.
But there's no party affiliation. I think everyone's interested in having a tiebreaker who would listen to both sides, hear their arguments, and abide by legal precedent, abide by our requirements under federal and state law, and then make a call on a map that's fair and constitutional. And
as we wrap up this segment, what do you foresee happening then with the redistricting? Do you see any major changes happening?
Well, I think the map is going to change significantly because, as we've seen with the demographic numbers, the census numbers, the population has changed. It's moved, and each district has to be roughly equal in number. So you can't just leave the map as it is. It has to change to reflect the changing and moving demographics, has to change to reflect the change in ethnicity and race in our state, and it has to change to reflect the kind of legal precedents we talked about in Jersey City and Newark, among other places. So we would expect that the map would change rather significantly given those developments. We will see in a couple months.
Great. I look forward to it. We'll be keeping an eye on you.
Good.
And we're going to be right back. We're going to take a little break. We'll be right back. More with Assemblyman Jay Webber right after these messages. We're going to talk about the state of New Jersey and business in the state of New Jersey. So please stay with us.
Brighter future.
Welcome back to Meet the Leaders. I'm Debbie Duhame here with Assemblyman Jay Webber, and we are talking about the great state of New Jersey. And let's talk about business in the state of New Jersey. It's something that, you know, we've seen a lot of challenges with the economy here in the state of New Jersey, small businesses, large businesses. I know that you're a co-sponsor with the business tax reform. Tell us what that's all about.
Well, we need to stimulate our economy in New Jersey, and one of the problems that we have several problems we're trying to address, but one of the problems we have is that our tax code is simply not competitive. We punish people when they don't make a profit, and we punish them when they do in New Jersey. And so one of the things that I've been trying to work on is rather comprehensive tax reform that will encourage investment and entrepreneurship in our state. And fortunately, that reform has been moving, and it's part of a process that I think is vital to turning our state around and making us more prosperous.
What will happen with this particular bill? How will it help a business, especially a business that's struggling?
Yeah, any small business owner in New Jersey knows that, and we've heard the complaint many times, the state of New Jersey wants to be your partner when you're making a profit, and they have nothing to do with you when you're losing money.
So what happens when they're losing money? Because so many people struggling now.
We have this is a gross income tax reform that I'm specifically talking about, and the way it works now is New Jersey will tax you on certain income that you make, but it won't let you count losses in other forms of income that you might have against the income that you've made. So, for example, if you have a small company in an LLC, and that company makes a profit of $100,000, the state's going to tax you on that. But if you have a little partnership on the side, a little side business that you were thinking about starting, and that partnership has a loss of $50,000, you can't count the loss in your partnership against the profit from your LLC. Oh. You have to eat it. And so, but the next year, if the partnership makes $100,000, they tax you on the full $100,000. They don't take into account that you had to invest $50,000 or lose $50,000 in the first year in order to make that profit in the second year. So you see the unfairness where the state says, okay, we're in business with you and we take our share when you're making money, but when you're losing money, you're on your own, you eat your losses on your own. And so that discourages people from making the kind of investments and taking the kind of risks that could stimulate our economy. Start small businesses, start a business on the side. If you're working and you're earning a salary, but you have an idea that you can start a business on the weekends and you have a little LLC, you're not going to be able to deduct you can't deduct the losses from the LLC against your income coming that you take home. And so my idea has been to change that and allow us to deduct losses we might experience in one part of our lives against the gains that we're making in others. And so it would encourage people to make those investments and take those risks. And not only would it allow you to take them from one business and count them against another, but it would allow you to take a loss one year and carry it forward into the future. So if it took you 3 years to become profitable, you don't lose all the losses. You retain the losses, and then in the future years when you start making a profit, the state won't automatically tax you. You'll first be able to deduct the losses against the profits that you make in year 4, 5, or 6. And that gives people an incentive to take those risks, start those businesses. New Jersey's gross income tax formula and structure is something that makes us very uncompetitive. When people have an option to domicile here in New Jersey or New York, New Jersey or Connecticut, New Jersey or Pennsylvania, the ability to offset losses and carry losses forward is a significant consideration. And right now we give people no incentive to stay here in New Jersey or set up shop here in New Jersey. This reform should help to mitigate that.
Do you have bipartisan support for this?
Yes.
You have Democrats that want to help you as well.
Yeah, yes. and I was pleased to see that. My bill, I had a bill in that would have really blown up the gross income tax system and allowed us to count losses all the way across the spectrum. There's about 16 different income types that the state of New Jersey will tax. The Democrats saw that and said, well, that's a pretty good idea. We only want to handle 4 of those buckets, but a little bit of something good is better than nothing of something good. And so I was fully supportive of the Democrats' attempt to narrow my bill and take just a few buckets of income like LLCs, limited partnerships, and that sort of thing. And it passed unanimously through the Assembly, and I believe it passed through the Senate. It's awaiting the governor's approval. it's something I think the governor will support. I don't know if it fits in the structure of the budget, because we have a big budget deficit facing us for next year.
Okay.
And so this kind of tax reform might have to be phased in. It might not be feasible for next fiscal year, but maybe the fiscal year after that. But it is a good reform. It's the direction we should be heading in. And I was very pleased to see that every once in a while the Dems get it right, and they got it right on that bill, and I was happy to support them when they did.
Before we wrap up this segment, what do you say to the risk takers out there when they approach you? You know, they say, "Listen, we really want to take a chance on a business, but we're afraid." What do you say to them?
Well, look, everyone's got to make their own decisions, but I can tell you this: New Jersey is turning a corner. We spent a decade trying to patch budget holes with gimmicks, spending money we didn't have, borrowing money against our children's future, and not addressing the big problems like pension and benefit reform for our public employees, unemployment insurance reform. And so we have a governor who is committed to taking on those big issues and creating a business-friendly climate here in New Jersey. And we're not all there yet. We have more to do, but it's getting better all the time, and we're certainly becoming more competitive than some of our sister states. Illinois, for example, hiking taxes through the roof on their businesses and small businesses and individuals. In New Jersey, we're cutting taxes, cutting regulation.
We're on the right track.
And we're on the right track. So if you're thinking about taking a chance, take a chance on New Jersey.
Great. And we're going to take a little break. We're going to be right back to talk more with Assemblyman Jay Webber right after this. We're going to talk about the budget and the toolkit, so please stay with us. We'll be back in. Welcome back to Meet the Leaders. I'm Debbie Duhame here with Assemblyman Jay Webber, and we are talking about the challenges here in the state of New Jersey. One of the challenges we have, of course, is the budget and the economy. Tell us about the toolkit and how that's affecting the municipalities.
Well, you know, one of the governor's main priorities last year was to implement property tax reform, which he described as a toolkit for local elected officials to help get property taxes under control. And the first thing we did with the governor's leadership was to put a hard property tax cap on tax increases at the local level. And that was accomplished by July 4th, and that was a 2% cap on municipalities. That didn't help municipalities solve any problems, but what it did was set a target, a goal, and brought some real pressure to bear on the legislature and our local elected officials to get something done. And
are they getting things done?
Well,
are they cutting things? Are they working together with the shared services? What's happening?
I find that they are, especially in my district in Morris and Passaic counties. I think our local elected officials are doing a pretty good job for the most part, but what the hard cap did was really spur the legislature to act, because time was running out, and the law went into effect on January 1st of this year, 2011, and we spent the fall trying to find ways to allow municipalities to have the tools to get in under that cap. And so we did things like interest arbitration reform to help municipalities when they go to arbitration with police and fire and public employees, and kind of rein in the practice of arbitrators awarding pay increases and benefit increases that drove increases in property taxes and far exceeded the 2% cap. So we got some parity with arbitration and the cap. Arbitrators have to respect that 2% cap, and that should be helpful to municipalities. We tried to get civil service reform, but unfortunately the Democratic majority didn't give us the kind of civil service reform we needed.
What would that do?
Well, that would allow municipalities to explore shared services agreements and even consolidation when it made sense for them. But right now, there are municipalities who would share services much more quickly, but the civil service rules are written in such a way that either they can't conduct layoffs in a common sense way because of the arcane rules that they're living under, or they would have to, if they shared services, they'd have to pay the employees at the top rate. So if municipality A, municipality B want to share maybe a police force or a DPW department, and A was lower than B in their salary scale, you'd have to pay B's salary scale. And so there's no cost savings in it for A.
I see.
So the civil service laws as we have them now block a lot of the kind of shared services agreements we'd like to see. And so that was a main focus. We didn't get what we wanted, and unfortunately, the governor vetoed, or fortunately, unfortunately, the Democrats didn't pass the right bill. Fortunately, the governor vetoed it. We'll come back and try to get civil service reform later this year.
Before we wrap up the show, where do you see the budget going for this year then? What are the challenges and what do you think is going to happen?
More huge challenges. We have a projected deficit of almost $11 billion, about the same as last year. I mean, these are problems we've inherited from the last decade. We're starting, like I said, we're starting to do the right things to get that under control, but difficult cuts. I think innovative reforms to programs like Medicaid are going to be necessary. I don't think municipalities should be expecting any more money coming from Trenton. They're going to have to do with what they did last year in all likelihood. And important things like tax reform might have to be delayed or phased in, but huge challenges. The good news is that we have a Republican members of the legislature and a Republican governor who are ready to take them on.
Awesome, awesome. And we have run out of time on this edition of Meet the Leaders, and for anyone that would like to contact Assemblyman Webber, you can do so with the information that you see on your screen right now.